Today is September 12th. My name is Ebony Love, and I am joined by the Honorable Peggy and Quince, former Chief Justice of the Florida Supreme Court. We are audio recording via Zoom only. And Justice Quince, can you first tell me when you knew that you wanted to be an attorney?
Okay. Unlike a lot of people, I did not grow up wanting to be an attorney. I was more interested in the sciences. And so that was my undergraduate degree at Howard University was zoology. I had planned to go to medical school, but I began my undergraduate career in 1966. And as you know, a lot was going on in our country during that time. Um, we had the civil rights movement was still going on. We had students taking over administration buildings. We had the war in Vietnam going on. We had the murder of the students at Kent State University. So all of these things were happening during my undergraduate years. And that's when I became interested in the law because all of these incidents had some legal underpinning.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when I became interested in the law and decided instead of medical school to go to law school.
Okay, and taking a quick step back, you're from Virginia. Can you kind of tell me what your childhood was like?
Oh, I grew up in Virginia and it's in the segregated South. I went to an all Black elementary school and an all Black high school. And even though I finished high school in 1966 and the Brown versus Board of Education decision was decided in 1954, some 12 years uh, before I finished high school, our schools still remained segregated. There was even areas of at least one area of Virginia that I know of that closed its schools instead of complying with the mandates of Brown versus Board of Education. So I grew up in a segregated society. Not only were the schools segregated, but even my doctor's office was segregated. The Black patients waited in a room separate and apart from where the white patients waited. So it was just a different time than what we are going through right now. Segregation was the watchword of the day in my childhood.
And so, why did you pick Howard University for your undergraduate studies?
Well, I picked Howard because it had a wonderful reputation and it was an essentially Black college. And having grown up in segregation all through, as I said earlier, elementary and high school, I did not feel I was ready for an integrated situation. I had many scholarship offers from wonderful, essentially white universities, but I chose to go to Howard because I felt that I would be more comfortable in the Howard environment.
And what was your experience overall? I know you talked about kind of the broader context of what was happening in society, but on Howard's campus, what was it like? Tell me about, student life, studying zoology. Tell me about all of that.
It was, I must tell you that in my estimation, it was 4 of the best years of my life. I I came there knowing only one person. One of my freshman roommates was a lady that I had gone to high school with. And we actually asked to be roommates because we were both going to be going to Howard University. And we ended up in a triple room, and we ended up with the other person who was our roommate was a young lady from Chicago. I had no ideas, had never been to Chicago. I have been out of the state of Virginia, um, but I had never ventured out that far to Chicago. So it was like a new experience having someone who from the big city of Chicago. Um, but I met so many people from all over the country, people who are still my friends to this day. We get together and for various kinds of reunions for my sorority, Alpha Kappa Alpha, for my other group that I belonged to, which was Angel Flight, which is a part of the Air Force ROTC. We get together. We get together with the men from Honor Air Society, which was a part of the Air Force ROTC. So it was a wonderful experience because I met lifelong friends and people who were there to encourage and help you along the way. And the professors were really helpful people if you took the opportunity to go and talk with them and lay out whatever issue or issues you might be having. And to some extent, there were some white students and certainly some white professors at Howard. And I especially met some when I took some courses in the Air Force ROTC section. But it was still essentially a comfortable environment where I was surrounded by people who look like me. Although I must say it was a competitive environment. I lived in the dormitory that was essentially reserved for scholarship students. So it was really a place where all of the students seemed to be achievers in high school. And so it sort of kept you at the top, hopefully at the top of your game, because you were surrounded by people who were on the top of their games. So it was just a wonderful experience. If I had some times to live over, I don't want to uh, put short shrift to my marriage and my children and all that. But those were 4 of the most wonderful years of my life. And especially because I was an adult, but I was in a safety zone as an adult. And so it was, I enjoyed that experience. I would not trade it for anything.
And so you were at Howard, and so you kind of both given us what was happening in society in general, but also what was happening in your world on campus. So when did those worlds start to collide for you, and what steps did you take to actually go to law school?
Okay. Well, I applied to Howard University Law School, but I really felt at this stage of my life that I understood that the legal profession was essentially a white profession. There were, of course, some black lawyers. There were even a smattering of black judges, but it was essentially a white profession. And so I understood that it was time for me to try to navigate in an integrated, non-segregated, non-black environment. And so that's really why I applied to these white law schools and decided to go to Catholic University because, first of all, I was already settled in DC. I had an apartment and everything already. And so it was an easy transition to then go to law school right there in Washington, DC. And it was really the first integrated non-Black environment that I had to navigate. But I knew that that would be the legal profession. I would have to navigate in a non-Black environment. So I had to start someplace, and in law school was the place to start.
Two questions. You had said earlier that you could go to your teachers at Howard and ask them about issues. Did you have any mentors who helped you navigate applying to Catholic University?
Well, actually, I sort of did it on my own
Mhm.
because I actually also was interested in, well, I took both the medical entrance examination and the law school entrance examination and felt that, yeah, maybe, medical school was still somewhere in the background. Um, and so, in fact, I actually did better on the medical entrance examination than I did on the law school examination, but I decided to go to law school anyway. And I actually had a friend who was also applying for law school, and we sort of mentored each other and got each other through the application process, the process of getting scholarships or whatever monies we could get to help with our tuition, and which is really fascinating because the tuition at Catholic University in I guess 1972 when I began was $1,100 a year. Not 11, I'm sorry, $1,100 a semester,
Okay.
which is, I mean, it sounds like nothing to the tuitions that young people and you probably
Yes.
paid in law school. But in 1972, that was a good bit of money.
Mhm.
And so I got a scholarship to go, but I had to live also.
Mhm.
So I worked actually during law school. Uh, I, it was, they tried to discourage you from working,
Mhm.
that you should, devote all of your time to uh, law school. And I would have loved to have done that. But I did not come from a family that could help me. And so um, I wanted to do this. I needed the money. And so I worked when I was in law school.
And did you work nights or what kind of work did you do?
I essentially worked nights the first year. I had been working at a company, an insurance company, and they had what was basically their IT department back then was those big industrial computers where you had mag cards and all of those things. That was in the old computer days, and so I worked there as a computer operator from 3 to 11, 3 o'clock in the afternoon till 11 at night.
And what was it like going to law school? You had mentioned that this was your first kind of integrated learning experience. Were you the only Black student?
I was not the only Black student. There was a handful of us. In my incoming class, we had two sections, and I believe there was at least 6 students in each of those sections. It may have been one less or one more, but in that range of students in each section. And of course, we got together and did studies and things together. Um, to some extent, we were still a little isolated, and we certainly felt um, there were professors who felt that we should not have been there. I can remember distinctly one professor looking out and honing in on the Black students and saying something to the effect that he felt it was his obligation to weed out the incompetence. Looking at us, right? Mm-hmm. Well, I was bound and determined he wasn't talking to me. And there were law school is not easy. Mm-hmm. It takes a lot of work, a lot of reading, a lot of preparation, a lot of trying to comprehend and understand and put together what you have actually read. So law school is not easy. And I must confess, there was a time or two when I wondered if it was worth it. But that professor saying that was probably one of the reasons that I never said I'm going to give it up. Because I refuse to let him believe I was one of the incompetents.
And I probably bet that he didn't really know or care to know about what you're doing after school. Like, it is hard going through law school, but then to work on top of that.
Right. You know what it makes me think of now that is, remember just a few days ago when Coco won the Open?
Yes.
And she said something to the effect that the naysayers thought they were putting water on her fire and they were actually putting gas to keep the fire going. And I thought about that experience in law school when she made that statement, because he made me keep pushing as opposed to saying, oh, I don't want to do this anymore.
When you were in law school in your second and third years, were you allowed to choose electives?
Yes. The first year was essentially a curriculum that everyone did in their first year. But the second and third year, we were allowed to. We actually picked our own courses, the ones that we wanted to take.
And what did you want to take?
I'm trying to remember what I took. I know I took constitutional law, and it was one of the best decisions. Was constitutional law required?
It's required for us.
It may have been a required course, but it was one of the best courses that I took. Because later on, when I was both with the Attorney General's office and as a judge, constitutional law was the underpinning of lots of things. And so I was really pleased. But I took also advanced constitutional law. And so that was actually my favorite subject in law school. But as electives, I took things like local government law. I took antitrust. I'm trying to remember the course that actually one of the Black professors there taught. I believe it was the UCC, Uniform Commercial Code. So I took some interesting. Oh gosh, and one of the others was taxation. One of my least favorite courses and one of my least favorite things now. But I took taxation because I thought at least the basic taxation course would help me not with my personal finances, and also help if I ever decided to open an office. I would at least have a basic understanding of the tax code.
And so that kind of brings me to my next question, transitioning into practice. What was that like? Where did you start out working after law school?
I started out working at a place called the Rental Accommodations Office, and I was actually a hearing officer at administering DC's new rent control law. They had just passed the rent control law, and so I was a part of the first staff that was administering that law. And we would hear petitions from landlords to raise their rents. And they had to show us the need, basically, to raise their rents. And we would hear petitions from tenants who wanted their rents lowered because the landlord really wasn't giving them the services that were required under the lease. So we heard those kinds of petitions, and I enjoyed doing that. But then I moved back to Virginia for a short period of time and was in private practice with a couple of lawyers there, and I did basically landlord tenant and divorce work, domestic relations, I should say. Did those two areas basically. And I enjoyed that, but then decided to go back to DC. And I went back to the rental accommodations office and continued to be a hearing officer there until I eventually moved to Florida.
And what brought you to Florida?
Well, in the interim, I had gotten married. I married a young man I met in law school, and he was from Florida, Fred Buckeye. He was from Florida, and his mother was ill. And so we decided to move to Florida to be near her, and so we would be here to help her if she needed any help. Um, so that's what brought me to Florida. And of course, then I had to take the Florida bar exam. When I finished law school, I had taken the Virginia bar exam. I'm from Virginia. I took the Virginia bar exam. Uh, my husband, who is from Florida, when we finished law school, he took the Florida bar exam. And so we were both lawyers. I'm in Virginia. He's a lawyer in Florida. So we moved here because his mother was ill and we wanted to be close to her. But our intention really was that at some point we would go back to DC because I loved living in DC. I loved the whole atmosphere of DC. But then after my mother-in-law eventually passed, I got used to the weather. I'll tell you the real truth. I got used to the weather in Florida, and we decided not to move.
And what part of Florida were you? Two questions. What part of Florida were you in, and what year was this when you had moved down?
We moved to Florida in 1978, and we lived in Bradenton,
Okay.
Florida, for about a year.
Mhm.
And then we decided to move to Tampa because there were better opportunities in Tampa. My husband started out with a law office in Bradenton. I opened a small law office myself in Bradenton, and then he got a job with the state attorney's office in Hillsborough County, Tampa. And I was commuting for a while, and then we just decided to move to Tampa. And I got a job at the Florida Attorney General's office in Tampa. So we moved from Bradenton and to Tampa, and actually lived in Tampa until we moved to Tallahassee when I was appointed to the Florida Supreme Court.
And so you said that you began working in the Attorney General's office. Can you explain what the Attorney General does?
Well, the Attorney General's office is multifaceted, but I worked in their criminal division, handling criminal appeals. And the office I was in Tampa, and it covered the second district court of appeal area, which includes Hillsborough County, Pinellas County, Pasco County, Polk County, Lee County, um, all from Naples on up and over to
Mhm.
Polk County. So it was really a 14 county area, and we handled the appeals from all of those the counties. And that's where, when I said earlier, the constitutional law comes in, because, search and seizure is about the Fourth Amendment. We always had some search and seizure issues. It was um, criminal defendants basically appealing their convictions, and it was our job to argue on behalf of the state why their conviction was proper. And occasionally we had state appeals, like a defendant may have been granted a motion to a search and seizure, for example. Um, that the trial court may have said that the search was improper, and there was an opportunity there for the state to appeal. So that we may have been handling an appeal on the that the state actually initiated, but those were relatively few in comparison to the number of appeals by defendants. And we handled any felony appeal, including appeals where the sentence of death had been imposed.
And so you
But
had,
there are other parts of the Attorney General's office that I am not that familiar with. Like, they have a civil division, and they have an administrative law division. But I was only familiar really with the criminal division.
that was going to be my next question. Thank you. Um, and so you were at the Attorney General's office. When did becoming a judge start to kind of come onto your radar, and what was that transition like?
I really, the Attorney General's office, at least in the Tampa division, was a wonderful place to work. People talk about government lawyers and not, and this and that, but it was a wonderful place to work. It was a wonderful place to learn. And so I was very happy. I was very happy at the Attorney General's office, because not only, and it was basically a 9 to 5 job, even though there were always times, I don't care what kind of position you're in, that you need to do more than 9 to 5. But it was the kind of position where I essentially went home and could take care of my 2 daughters, my husband and I, taking care of our 2 daughters. And if I had other work to do, I could do it once they were fed, once they had done their homework, once they were in bed. I could do work that I may have needed to do for the Attorney General's office. So it was a good work situation. Um, it was just really, when I think back on it, I love being a judge. I won't take that away from. But if I had to pick one position that I had that was the most satisfying, because the range of personal interplay with the other attorneys, um, I would say it was the Attorney General's office.
Okay, and so how long were you there? About how many years?
I was there for about 13 and a half years.
Okay, and so towards the end, what did that transition look like?
Okay. And I know you asked me about wanting to become a judge, but it was years down that 13 and a half years. And actually, someone actually approached me, one of the higher ups in the Attorney General's office, like a deputy or something, and asked me if I had ever really considered applying for a judgeship. Because, at the appellate court level, there's appointments, as you don't run for anything. There's always an appointment by the governor. Whereas on the trial court level, you can actually run for a judgeship or be appointed to a judgeship. And so I was approached about it, and I said, I never really have given it a lot of thought, but it kind of planted a seed.
Mhm.
And I believe the very next year, I did, in fact, apply for a position on the Second District Court of Appeal. Now, I went through the whole process, interviewed everything, and my name was actually sent in a group of 4 to the governor. But at that time, the statute said you could only send 3 names. And so my name was the name that was dropped, and the other 3 people's name was sent. But about a year after that, there was other openings on the Second District Court of Appeal, and my name was sent in. I was interviewed by the governor and appointed to the Second District Court of Appeal. And that was after I'd been at the Attorney General's office for 13 and a half years. Um, at some point, it really may be time to move on. And I thought I could do even more for the people of the state of Florida in a judgeship position.
It's really interesting that you're telling this story because I actually had a conversation with a current Associate Justice of the Georgia Supreme Court, and she had the same kind of experience. She had never thought about becoming a judge, but it was somebody else who had approached her and really encouraged her to put her name into the hat, per se. Do you have any insight on how important it is for others to kind of look out and see what other attorneys are doing and like kind of try to encourage them to continue on in their career?
It certainly is. I mean, all of us need encouragement. We have to have people who are in our corner. When I applied for the judgeship, I needed people who were willing to vouch for me. Uh, which brings me to a point that I know you didn't ask this, but I must say this. You have to preserve your reputation. You have to do the best that you can in whatever position you are in. And you want people to be able to say about you that she is a good lawyer. She or he works hard, that their word is their bond. Our creed of professionalism ends with those words. My word is my bond. And you want people to be able to say that about you because they're always going to ask other people, no matter what it is you're applying for, even if you're running for a judgeship or running for some other office, people are going to talk. And whatever reputation you have developed is going to come out. So now, to get back to your question, helping other people, was that the question?
Yes.
I mean, I think it's incumbent upon us. I was the first Black female appointed to both the Second District Court of Appeal and the Florida Supreme Court. But you don't want that to be the end of the story. One appointment to one court or even 2 courts or even 3 is not enough. We want to perpetuate and make sure that other people follow. And so it is important for us to mentor other people, to make sure that they understand that they need to be the best that they can be. And in addition to mentoring in that sense, I think we should be available to mentor people in their work days. None of us know everything about any area of the law. And so you need somebody you can call on the phone and say, listen, I'm having this issue. where do I start? What do I do? Whatever. And we should be there for each other doing that. So I think we need that kind of mentoring also.
You had just said that you didn't want it to end at you were the first Black woman appointed to the second DCA or to the Florida Supreme Court. So, what do you hope or what do you think your legacy has been?
Well, of course, that's part of it. Every time someone does a bio, or every time you speak someplace, they say she was the first woman to do this or the first woman to that. So that's part of your legacy. But I hope that my legacy really is that I represented the people of the state of Florida well.
And so I have a couple of final questions, and they
Mhm.
all are now talking about your time on the bench. If you had to explain the importance of state Supreme Courts to someone who does not practice the law, how would you explain their importance?
Well, every state has its own, we are 50 diverse states. We have our own set of laws, statutes. We have our own state constitutions. The importance of the Supreme Court of a state is that court becomes the final say on what a statute means, or even if it's brought to them, whether that statute is constitutional. And it's the final say that so that statutes and laws are uniformly applied throughout the state. Because often on the appellate court level in Florida, we have now 6, but at the time I was on the court, 5 district courts of appeal. And the one in Lakeland that I used to be a part of, the Second District Court of Appeal, may decide an issue of law one way. But then you get to the Third District Court of Appeal in Miami, and they may decide that same issue of law in a different way. The law shouldn't be different in Miami than in Tampa. And so those are the kind of cases, for the most part. There are other areas that the court dealt with, but for the most part, the Supreme Court of the state would then resolve that issue. So that if whatever the Supreme Court said the interpretation of that statute should be, it is then uniformly applied throughout the state. And that's the real importance of having a state Supreme Court, so that whether you're in Jacksonville or Tallahassee, or whether you're in Miami or Pensacola, every person is treated the same under that statute.
The last kind of question about your time on the bench. Again, this is trying to explain this to people who may not be familiar with the legal profession or how our courts work. And so in Florida, judges are retained through the electorate. Can you explain what that means to someone who doesn't understand what retention means for judges on the bench?
Okay. Only the appellate court, which is our district courts of appeal, and the Florida Supreme Court go through a retention process. They go through a merit selection process at the beginning of their tenure. They're not elected by the people. They have a nominating committee that vets all of these people, looks at what jobs and careers they've had in the past. They look at whether or not they've done any writings. They look at cases that they have been involved in over the years and all of that. And then they make a recommendation to the governor of up to 5 names now who should be appointed to the court. And so the governor then makes a choice, and that person is then appointed to the court. Under the Florida Constitution, once you are appointed to the court, you have to go before the population, the general electorate of the state. After the initial appointment, you go the first general election after you have been in office for at least a year. And the people get to vote yes or no whether or not you should stay in that position. Now, after that first retention, if you are retained, then you're on the ballot 6 years later. So then it becomes every 6 years that the electorate gets to decide whether or not you stay on the court. The beauty of it to me is you don't have an opponent, but the electorate gets to say, yes, this person should stay, or no, this person should not stay.
Thank you so much for that. 3 last questions. First, in your career, and I think that this happened when you were on the Florida Supreme Court, you helped create a project that kind of tracked the history of Florida Black attorneys. Can you kind of tell me a little bit about that project?
Well, it has been my experience that when you don't know people, that's when you stand off from them and you keep yourself separate from them. And even those of us in the profession didn't really know the history of how long we had even been, or there had been Black lawyers in the state of Florida. And certainly we didn't expect any other group to know that information. And so when I was the chief, I decided that we needed to do something about that. And I asked some people, including my good friend June McKinney, who spearheaded the project, to let's lay out how the first Black lawyers in Florida and go up. Now, we couldn't cover all of those years. They started in 1860 something, I believe. And so we cut it off at 1979. From the beginning, 1860 something to 1979. And we researched and found all of the Black lawyers who have been admitted to the Florida bar during that time period, and put little bios about them, what they had done during their careers, and had it published as a book. I'm very proud of the fact that we sent a copy of that book to every library in the state of Florida. There should be a copy of that in every library in the state of Florida. And so it really was a project of history, capturing our history and dispersing that history so that people would have an opportunity to know it.
And so I have a copy of the books and for my own personal library, and something that I really I don't know why I just started to get emotional about this, but something that I really love about it is that y'all took pictures of these folks. And so I actually just had an interview with Judge Zebedee Wright, who's in South Florida, and I've been trying to find pictures of him online, and there are 2. And so I go into that book and I see a picture of him when he was younger that I cannot find anywhere online. And it's just like seeing his face when he was younger, comparing it to this person that I met a couple of days ago. It's just an experience that I hope that future generations, whoever picks up that book, will be able to kind of experience and feel themselves.
Yeah. And I hope that that people will continue to read it and just know history. All of this is history. All of it is a part of this state's history. And so to that extent, I am very proud of the work that we all did. This was not a single person's project, believe me. because it took research and even writing the bios about people. Some people wrote their own bios, others, you wrote their bios for them. But it was a project that took some time, and we are all very proud of it.
And so, my last question um, actually, sorry, there's two. What advice would you give to aspiring lawyers?
I'm going to borrow from the armed forces. Be all that you can be. Do the best that you can in whatever area of the law that you are interested in. And don't be discouraged if you start out thinking, I want to be a hotshot trial attorney, but then you find out that I'm really much better at writing than I am at standing up before a jury and trying to argue a case. There's nothing wrong with that. There's lots of room for all kinds of personalities in the legal profession. And there's so many areas that you can practice law in that don't be discouraged if the first ones or even the first two that you get involved in are not what you eventually end up doing. But whatever it is that you do your very best and make your mantra, my word is my bond.
And my last question is there anything I did not ask you about that you would like to share?
I was trying to think. I can't think of anything. I think you were actually pretty thorough there. Oh, I do have one other thing I could share.
Mhm.
When the time comes that you are like me, retired, um, it's not the end. You still need to be involved. And as a lawyer, as a judge, we should always be involved in our communities. And when you get to the point where I am, where you're retired, you should still stay involved with your community.
Thank you so much, former Justice Quince. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to me, and I really hope that other people can not only learn from your example, but also take a little bit of your story with them in their next day.
All right. Thank you. It was my pleasure. And actually, I'm going to send you an op-ed piece that I had published in Bloomberg Law recently.